Welcome to part 2 of the Gilded Age. Today we'll be discussing immigration and urbanization, or the growth of cities. The U.S. population increased from about 30 million in 1860 to over 74 million in 1900. Most of this increase can be attributed to the large number of immigrants who arrived in the U.S. during the second and third waves of immigration from Europe. These were known as new immigrants, since they came from different parts of Europe than in the past. They came from Eastern and Southern Europe. They were ethnically different and from different religions. Both the rural and urban populations increased during the Gilded Age. However, as you can see in the graph, the percentage of Americans living in urban areas or cities became much larger as we approached 1900. In addition, different groups of immigrants moved to either cities in the north or northeast or settled farms in the Midwest. Cities grow bigger and bigger. The U.S. will eventually become an urban country with most of our population living in cities. Urbanization, or the growth of cities, happened for two main reasons. Number one, rapid improvements in farming technology during the second half of the 19th century were good news for some farmers, but bad news for others. Inventions such as the steel plow and the McCormick reaper made farming more efficient, but that meant that fewer laborers were needed to work the land. Secondly, as more and more farms merged, creating bonanza farms, many rural people moved to cities to find whatever work that they could. Between 1890 and 1910, about 200,000 African Americans moved north and west to cities such as Chicago and Detroit in order to escape racial violence, economic hardship, and political oppression. The negative forces driving Europeans to emigrate in the late 19th century included: number one, the poverty of displaced farm workers driven from the land by the mechanization of farm work. More machines means less jobs. Number two, overcrowding and joblessness in European cities as a result of a population boom. Number three, religious persecution, such as that of the Jewish pogroms in Russia. A pogrom is an organized massacre of helpless people, in this case, the Jews. The positive reasons for choosing to emigrate to the United States were: number one, economic opportunities afforded by the settling of the Great Plains and the abundance of industrial jobs in the U.S. cities. Number two, another reason is this country's reputation for political and religious freedom. Number three, the introduction of large steamships and relatively inexpensive one-way passage in these ships made it possible for millions of poor Europeans to emigrate. Immigrants tended to settle in ethnic communities in major cities where attempts were made to maintain their cultural identity, leading many native-born Americans to push for the assimilation of these immigrants into the American melting pot. The Americanization movement was designed to assimilate people of wide-ranging cultures into the dominant American culture. This social campaign was sponsored by the government and by concerned citizens. Schools and voluntary associations provided programs to teach immigrants skills needed for citizenship, such as English and American history and government. Subjects such as cooking and social etiquette were included in the curriculum to help newcomers learn the ways of native-born Americans. Native-born Americans disliked Irish immigrants for many reasons. They looked down on them because of their poor living conditions. Irish immigrants were also willing to work for lower wages. One of the biggest reasons why native-born Americans disliked the Irish was over the issue of religion. Centuries of conflict between Protestants and Catholics made its way to the United States, where many Americans attacked Irish immigrants who were Catholic. Chinese workers began to migrate to the U.S. in the 1850s to work in gold mines, on farms, and do factory work. They were instrumental in building the Transcontinental Railroad as well. Discrimination against Chinese immigrants increased over time. Many Americans felt that they were taking away jobs that were made for native-born whites. Efforts to restrict immigration were supported by diverse groups, such as, number one, labor unions, which feared employers would use immigrants to lower wages and break strikes. Two, nativist societies like the American Protective Association, which was openly prejudiced against Roman Catholics. And three, social Darwinists, who viewed the new immigrants as biologically inferior to English and Germanic stocks. During a severe depression in the 1890s, foreigners became a convenient scapegoat for jobless workers, as well as for employers who blamed strikes and the labor movement on foreign agitators. The rise in new immigrants made Americans fearful that we would lose our national identity. This gave rise to nativist fears, or overt favoritism towards native-born white Americans. By 1886, Congress had passed a number of new laws restricting immigration. First came the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, placing a ban on all new immigrants from China. Then came the restrictions on the immigration of undesirable persons, those convicted of criminal acts or diagnosed as mentally incompetent. Another law in 1885 prohibited contract labor in order to protect American workers. Soon after the opening of Ellis Island as an immigration center in 1892, new arrivals had to pass a more rigorous medical and document examination and pay an entry tax before being allowed into the United States. Women like Jane Addams wanted to solve urban problems and founded Chicago's Hull House. It was a settlement house which served as a community center in a slum neighborhood that provided assistance to people in the area, especially immigrants. In search of the American dream, immigrants fresh out of Ellis Island were immediately met with the face of urban corruption. A political machine controlled every major political city. The political machine was an organized group that controlled all the activities of a political party in a city. It offers services to voters and businesses in exchange for political and financial support. The political machine worked together to elect their candidates and guarantee the success of the machine. The political boss, the leader of the political machine, was the most powerful man in the city, even if he wasn't the mayor. He could get you a business license if you wanted to open up a store. He influenced the courts and other municipal agencies. These guys actually did their neighborhoods and their city a lot of good. They built parks, sewer systems, waterworks. They gave money to schools, hospitals, and orphanages. Why did they do this? Was it out of the goodness of their hearts? No, they did it for the votes. The more they were seen as doing good for the city, the more power and influence that they acquired. This diagram further illustrates how political machines kept their power in the major cities of the United States during the Gilded Age. They controlled politics and officials. They handed out jobs, contracts, and favors. In exchange for this, residents would vote for the candidates supported by political machines, and therefore the political machines would maintain their power. Corruption was so prevalent during the Gilded Age due largely to the business theory of social Darwinism and the policy of laissez-faire. Under social Darwinism, only the strongest businesses would survive, allowing for a winner-take-all type attitude leading to the growth of corruption. The laissez-faire attitude of the government allowed business leaders to use any and all means to destroy their competitors, maintain protective tariffs, and utilize corrupt bargaining to grow businesses, perfectly coinciding with governmental corruption. Party patronage became the political agenda at this time due to the lack of any legislative agenda. Party politics become not about serving the voters, but gaining and maintaining power. One such example of this patronage involved New York Senator Roscoe Conkling, a powerful leader of the Republican political machine known as the Stalwarts. He dictated who in the Republican ranks would be appointed to lucrative jobs in the New York Customs House. Patronage got so bad that it eventually cost the president his life. When James Garfield refused to appoint a stalwart to positions in his administration, he was assassinated by Charles Guiteau. Boss Tweed became the head of Tammany Hall, the Democratic political machine in New York City. He led a corrupt group of politicians that defrauded the city. Boss Tweed helped to get the New York City courthouse built. It cost the taxpayers over $13 million. It actually only cost $3 million to build. Where do you think the other $10 million went? It went to Tweed and his cronies. We call this graft. Cities of the late 19th century underwent significant changes, not only in their size, but in their internal structure and design. At first, city residents tried to carry on life in large cities much as they had in small villages. They did not expect a lot of public services from municipal governments, and as a result, American cities could not deal effectively with overcrowding, transportation issues, disease caused by insufficient water supply, the buildup of waste, pollution, crime, fire, and other hazards. Only slowly did advocates for healthier and more beautiful cities convince citizens and city governments of the need for change. They would develop row houses, mass transit, water purification systems, waste disposal plans, and hire paid police and fire departments, and create zoning laws to regulate urban development. Next, let's talk about women reformers. We've already talked about women like Jane Addams and her settlement house known as the Hull House in Chicago. We also learned about Mother Jones, who convinced President Teddy Roosevelt to start passing child labor laws. Let's now focus on politics. The establishment of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA, in 1890 by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony tried to secure the vote for women. In 1869, Wyoming was the first state to grant full suffrage to women. In the 1880s and 1890s, a number of Protestant clergymen espoused the cause of social justice for the poor, especially the urban poor. They preached what they called the social gospel, or the importance of applying Christian principles to social problems, preaching that salvation through service to the poor. Leading the social gospel movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was a New York minister named Walter Rauschenbusch, who worked in New York City's Hell's Kitchen and wrote several books urging organized religions to take up the cause of social justice. His social gospel preached and encouraged many middle-class Protestants to attack urban problems.